Hello, my name is Dr. Georgia Phillip from the Centre for Research on Children and Families at the University of East Anglia. I'm going to talk about our research on working more effectively with fathers. The project I'm going to talk about is called Counting Fathers In, Understanding Men's Experiences of the Child Protection System in England. The research was conducted from 2014 to 2017 and was funded by the Nuffield Foundation. The research was led by Professor Marion Brandon, and the researchers were myself and Dr. John Clifton. Failure to engage effectively with fathers is a problem on two counts. Firstly, it means a failure to hold men and women equally to account for the safe care of children. Secondly, it means a failure to fully and fairly assess what fathers are actually doing or could do to care for their children. Child and family welfare services still struggle to engage effectively with men, with children's fathers and father figures. This is a long-standing problem that seems to be very hard to change, so we need new research to tackle the issue or to look at it in a different way. Most existing research on father engagement has been done from the perspective of professionals or of service design or delivery. There has been little which focuses on the perspectives of fathers themselves. Our project, Counting Fathers In, was designed to examine the child protection system from the perspective of fathers involved in it and to study this over time. The research involved 3 local authorities in the east of England and had 2 main elements. We did an analysis of children's case files. We looked back at the electronic records for 150 children, that's 50 in each authority, with a child protection plan that began in January 2014 and followed each case over a period of 12 months. We looked at the number of men involved in the children's lives, at what picture of these men's lives could be built from the records, and at what level of engagement there had been in the child protection process or any other service or intervention that had happened over the year. Alongside this, we undertook an in-depth, year-long study of 35 fathers, so that's around 10 in each authority, who had at least one child with a newly made child protection plan. In research terms, this is called a qualitative longitudinal study because it involves studying people's lived experience, and it does this over time rather than in a one-off interview. Our research was the first time this method had been used with this particular population of men. All the fathers who took part were interviewed at length at the start and the end of the 12-month study period, with monthly phone calls in between. We used text messages and mobile phones and occasionally email to keep in touch. Of the 35 men who started the year, 28 stayed in touch with us for the full year, and of those who left the study, all kept in touch for at least 3 months. We also organised focus group discussions with groups of social workers and managers in each authority to share early findings and compare these with practitioners' experiences of engaging fathers in the child protection process. Before sharing some of our key findings, I want to say something about the picture of men's lives that emerged from our study and how this relates to wider ideas about fathers and mothers. Our findings support an argument found in other research that fathering is sensitive to context. And what this means is that men's position, identity and sense of confidence as a father is highly dependent on their circumstances. And this is not just about material circumstances, so like work or housing, but also the support systems and the emotional resources that men need to be involved fathers. This means that men may experience fatherhood as less secure or as more changeable than women tend to experience motherhood. Another way of looking at this idea is to say that father's role and the father-child relationship still tends to be seen as secondary to that of mothers and the mother-child relationship. This long-standing cultural idea of mothers as primary carers brings its own set of problems for women, but it also affects the way men are perceived and treated as fathers, including within social policy and welfare agencies such as children's services. The men in our study were doing fatherhood in challenging circumstances, and this included high levels of chronic ill health, both physical and mental, precarious employment, so things like temporary work or 0 hours contracts, changing or reducing entitlement to welfare benefits, and insecure housing. Finding and keeping suitable accommodation for low-income, non-resident fathers was a real and recurring issue. The majority of the men were also negotiating family life across different households, over geographic distance and over time, often with complex networks of relatives, new partners, ex-partners, birth and stepchildren. So there are 2 points to emphasise here. One is that the evidence from our research challenges the idea of father absence. These men were doing something and trying to keep a stake in fatherhood for good or ill, but their activities and their perspectives were not always seen by the professionals involved. Secondly, we did observe change in men's activities and identities as fathers over time. This change was sometimes for the better and sometimes meant that things got worse. There were push and pull factors that could increase or decrease men's confidence and involvement in their children's lives and in the child protection process. So fatherhood was sensitive to context, which means that what social workers and other professionals do in relation to fathers really matters. So now I'm going to outline 5 key ideas from our research and try to show how they can help improve practice with fathers. Take working with both mothers and fathers as given. Fathers are as responsible for the safe care of children as mothers are, and children, women and men need to see this in action. Effective engagement with fathers has to both hold men accountable and directly value their parenting on its own terms. So including fathers needs to be routine, if you like, a baseline expectation, rather than seen as an optional extra or as a last resort. This approach will still involve making decisions to exclude some fathers, but it could nonetheless improve how such decisions are made and communicated to them. Secondly, most fathers, like most mothers where there are child welfare concerns, present a combination of both resource and risk factors for their children, rather than being all good or all bad. However, our research showed that fathers were more likely to be seen in binary terms as either a risk or a resource, and that concerns were more likely to be interpreted as a risk rather than as a need. Practitioners appeared much less confident to take a both-and approach with fathers than with mothers. We suggest that taking a both-and approach to men's safe parenting is in line with strengths-based working and is likely to offer a fuller and fairer means of assessing what kind of involvement a father may have with his child. We argue that improving father engagement requires thinking critically about parenting as a gendered experience. And that is to say that fathers and mothers encounter different expectations, sanctions, rewards, opportunities and constraints as parents. Such ideas about gender and parenting run deep, and they not only shape daily lives but also how social workers and fathers interact, how fathers are perceived by agencies, and how services are designed. We found evidence from the fathers and from the focus groups with social workers and managers of areas where fathers were treated differently and unfairly compared with mothers. 2 challenging examples of this were how men's emotions, and in particular anger, were interpreted by professionals, and how allegations of domestic abuse or harm to children were handled. Using an approach of gender neutrality might in fact have the unintended consequence of ignoring important differences in men's and women's experiences of parenting, and this in turn can mean missing important opportunities to engage directly with fathers and also failing to directly consider men's needs and capacities as parents, or give them opportunities for change. Critical and reflective thinking is an established skill in social work practice, and our point is therefore to apply this to working with fathers. One technique to try out is to switch it. Consider a case and switch the position of each parent to see what light this sheds on the practice and on the approach being taken with the mother and with the father. In our focus group discussions, social workers used this to illustrate cases where fathers were treated unfairly or where their perspectives did not seem to carry the same weight as mothers. So we are arguing for a more gender-sensitive approach to casework, to service design and to delivery. We see this as one way to build more effective working relationships with fathers and to support men's parenting. Our research revealed interesting insights about how time is experienced by fathers and by social workers, and about how the issue of timing is relevant for improving father engagement. It's important to consider the differences and the potential clashes between organisational time, so including things like formal timescales, and the everyday lived time. The fathers in our study described social work as rushed and slow, and what they meant by this was that from their point of view, social work consisted of bursts of activity involving meetings and plans and actions presented to fathers as urgent and serious, followed by periods of time where nothing much seemed to happen, or where plans were extended or goalposts changed. Experiencing social work in this way often undermined fathers' confidence in the local authority and in the social worker. And this perception seemed particular to fathers, and especially to non-resident fathers, and so indicates that they may experience services very differently to mothers. It also seemed that official timeframes could easily undervalue or not take account of fathers' lived experience and the often competing pressures on their time. So a key point for practice here is about clarity and transparency around services, formal processes, assessments and so on. More effective and more open communication about what will happen, when, how long things will take and why is directly relevant for managing fathers' expectations, which in turn may sustain trust or good faith in any intervention. Counting fathers in also highlighted a point about timing. So not only is it important to think about father engagement in terms of whether things happen and whether a father is included, but also to look at when things happen. Our research found evidence from fathers and from social workers of a tendency to postpone fathers' inclusion in assessments and in planning, which meant that fathers were often seen as carers of last resort, for example, if a case was on the brink of care proceedings. In some instances, such delay was to do with the time needed to identify a father, but often it was explained in terms of a reluctance to open up a whole new can of risk. Approaching fathers only as a last resort has a whole range of implications for children, mothers, fathers, and for the paternal network. It could constitute another form of unfairness. For example, if fathers are not given the time or support to be able to take on full care of their children. The research also showed that delaying fathers' inclusion was damaging for relationship building between social workers and fathers. Early, direct contact with fathers was a key factor in establishing some kind of working relationship and therefore a way of engaging him. And this was especially important for non-resident fathers, where being directly consulted and listened to from the start sent an important message about even-handedness on the part of the social worker. Our research studied the child protection system and fathers' experience of it over time. And what this highlighted was, firstly, that the ongoing issue of father engagement is better understood as dynamic, as an interaction between fathers and social workers, rather than as a problem with either one or the other. Secondly, it highlighted moments of change or of push and pull factors that could draw fathers into the process or push them out. In the context of child protection, the local authority intervenes in family life with more or less collaboration with parents, and so becomes an important gatekeeping figure for fathers. What we saw was that child protection services and processes produced gate opening and gate closing moments for men. Opportunities created or at other times missed or ignored to include fathers or to consider or to review what their involvement could be. Sometimes this gatekeeping was to do with formal or procedural factors, but at other times it was more to do with attitudes or assumptions about men and parenting. Examples of gate closing included fathers being considered only as a last resort, a lack of flexibility in how meetings were managed, how men's challenging behaviour was responded to, and how allegations of domestic abuse were handled. Examples of gate opening included workers seeking fathers' perspectives early on, or fathers being directly, explicitly included in and also held accountable for care planning, direct support for men's parenting, and that included advocacy for other services, and being willing to reconsider men's involvement with children in the light of changed circumstances. So using this idea of gatekeeping can draw attention to the role and the influence of social workers and other practitioners in shaping father engagement. And it provides another important tool for reflecting on and improving practice with fathers. At the same time, our study showed how the actions of mothers and of fathers themselves can also act as a form of gatekeeping, to manage the local authority's presence in their lives and any perceived threat that this poses. So our suggestion then is that thinking about child protection services in terms of gatekeeping can help to understand the long-standing problem of father engagement. And it can also help to highlight or to keep in mind the power of social workers to create opportunities for change for fathers and for their children. One of the main messages from our research is the relevance to social workers of understanding men's lives as fathers in order to fully and fairly assess the combination of resources and risk factors they may present for their children. Listening carefully to fathers' life narratives is important for social workers to make balanced assessments of fathers. Empathic or active listening is accepted as an effective way of engaging mothers, helping to validate identity or improve self-confidence. The social workers therefore can and need to apply the same curiosity and skill to hearing fathers' stories. Responding to fathers as people with needs and concerns of their own through a curiosity about their lives and what they are actually doing has the potential to improve their ability to be effective, involved fathers. So achieving some means of hearing a man's story should also be seen as routine and as valuable, rather than as an additional or an unmanageable task. This means that persistence, which usually involves time, has to be expected at an organisational level, and workers need to be supported in achieving direct contact, particularly with non-resident fathers. Such curiosity can help to make the range of men's parenting more visible, or to identify fathers' needs and strengths. Professional curiosity is also likely to challenge certain assumptions about father absence that can often become established or left unquestioned. So our findings suggest that the need for professional curiosity, persistence and time is crucial for decisions about fathers as safe or good enough parents. But it is equally important for building a working relationship through which these kinds of decisions can be fairly reached, in a way more likely to be bearable for fathers. The Counting Fathers In study provides important insights into fathers' experiences and perspectives, and an analysis of the child protection process as it unfolds over time, all with the aim of improving fathers' involvement with services and with their children's lives. Thank you for listening to and being curious about the findings I've shared here. If you want to read more, you can find our research briefing and the full research report on our website at www.uea.ac.uk/centre-research-child-family. Both are free to download. Thank you. Best wishes.